You're listening to Everything's Political. I'm Zeena Coda, and I'm really excited today to be joined by my friend Scott Goodstein of Catalyst Campaigns, a digital strategist in the political world, music, and beyond. Scott. So I met Scott. I'll give you guys a little bit of background how I met Scott. So I was creeping the political space and being a digital trap queen that I am, really wanted to use my best skills to help, get Trump out of office. So stumbled across my way through a friend that was in a band actually back in the day as well in New Jersey. See how music connects everybody. And he knew Scott. And Scott's just one of the most interesting people that I've ever met. And we'll dig into some of his musical connection with politics in just a bit. But Scott, welcome to the show.
It is great to be here and an official guest. Instead of us just doing activism, we get to just, I guess, talk about it for a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your background? I think, obviously you're a punk rock dude, who loves him some Faith No More too, so I can respect that. Um, but would love to hear a bit about your background and like how you landed into politics.
Sure. So I grew up in Cleveland in the '80s, which was not that awesome. And so you listen to a lot of, for me, it was a lot of hair metal, and then moved off to DC to go to school, and sort of fell into the Discord, positive force world. And in DC, it was pretty straightforward. Like everybody was there to like study politics and activism, and the punk rock movement there was the most progressive political punk rock movement that has ever existed. And I was there during the early '90s in the heyday of Fugazi, Shudder to Think, Jawbox. Like, so for me to drop out of school and go join the revolution was just what people did. Like, oh, you're dropping out and touring the country with your band, and I'm going to drop out and go do a labor union organizing gig somewhere, an anti-Walmart gig or a congressional race. And then I just kept bouncing back and forth to DC, like your friends who tour with a band, just show back up every 6 months.
And how did you get into it? So when you have this vision, okay, like I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm actually going to make some, active change towards what, we're speaking out against in the punk rock world. I mean, at least in the 90s, I feel like people were vocal, didn't just bitch like they do online now, and actually would take a stand and, get out there in full force in real life to, advocate obviously for what they wanted. But like, you were obviously young then, a young buck.
Yeah, I mean,
How'd you fall into it?
well, punk rock is always gets a little bit crazy. So you were in this normal world in DC where musicians and artists made it cool to be involved in your community. So people like Ian MacKaye literally, made it the in thing to support fundraisers for causes. So positive
Who's
force.
that in case people don't know who that is?
If you don't know who that is, stop listening to this show. Um, Ian MacKaye of Minor Threat, and then Fugazi, Evans, and now Kariki. Um, yeah, he's got a new band out. Anyways, so he ran this record label called Discord, and all of the bands on it in the '90s did free shows right behind the American University campus in Northwest DC. There's a little fort that was like from the Civil War called Fort Reno, and it's like right behind the Tenleytown Metro stop, and it's like it was Tuesdays and Thursday nights for like 60 years. There's been concerts in the park that were taken over by the punk rock community of Northwest DC, and then they started holding benefits for every cause. Like, so it became like, if you're in a new band or you've got something to say, or you're trying to raise money and awareness, you were raising money for all these different causes and organizations, or the organizations would come and speak before the show. Um, I was involved in the college radio station at American University, and started becoming. Well, the word wasn't woke back then, but I started having this awakening of like, oh my God, the shit that my teachers in high school said wasn't true, and there's this bullshit military industrial complex, and there's wars going on, and so I took a class in campaign management instead of political theory, and it wasn't a degree, it wasn't a field of campaign management. There was like a weekend type class. I met a guy who said, "Hey man, you can study the shit or you can go do it." Well,
Very
all right,
punk rock of him, and
you
very
know,
punk
like
rock of you at that
yeah.
time.
So I like put my stuff in a storage locker and cut my hair, got rid of all my piercings, and called my parents up and was like, I'm gonna go off to work on the U.S. Senate race for Ron Wyden in Oregon against, it was a special election, and I'm dropping out of college.
What
Uh,
was their reaction?
uh, they they are a very traditional family of working class Cleveland, Ohio, and were very nervous about what it was that I was doing. And I promised them that I would go back after the election was over, but this would advance my career. Uh, I did. I eventually got my master's degree through night school.
You
But
fancy, Scott.
I threw that out there for mom and dad in case they listen to the podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I made you proud, guys.
but uh, I school just wasn't like studying philosophy and studying like the history of James Madison. I didn't give a crap about. Right. Like I wanted to like kick politicians in the teeth. And I fell in love with political propaganda and agitation. And at the same time, I had this like weird shit job working for like Sony Music, doing like, staple gunning posters up before, Corn came to town.
Oh
Uh,
man,
sorry,
that's where we're aligned, man.
you
We
know, and you're like making $40 a week, like slinging brand new music that maybe some of it you like, some of it you don't. But I dropped out of that, and I remember the music industry being like, you're gonna have to pick between music and politics, and I'm like, no, I'm not gonna pick between music and politics. And so every political campaign I've been involved in, I've tried building like a soundtrack for that campaign, or getting the kids on the campaign to listen to like some type of decent music, or if it's a congressional race somewhere, bringing in like local bands to help out. Like there was always like a music angle, because I'm like, I'm not picking between music and politics. So I've spent the last 20 years trying to like make, in my mind, this activism have a cultural component to it.
I mean, it does, right? And that's when we first met, I thought that it was like so interesting and fascinating about your history that you've done it throughout the years and that you have like a really firm grasp on, how music interplays with culture, interplays with politics. I mean, you look back to like, I don't know, I was watching some stupid specials like Jimmy Carter, the rock and roll president, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, yeah. And it's like interesting because it's like music has always played, a part in driving the narrative forward, whether or not it's stunting or driving it forward. So it's interesting, like
Yeah, I
that
mean,
you
look,
have done this. You have found a way to combine two things I personally love as well. So I've always respected it and never thought that somebody could make a career out of it. Right.
yeah, and it doesn't pay shit. So let's just be honest on that.
Well, that's why I work the corporate jobs.
I do a lot of the music and activism because I can't help myself. It's a passion, to make sure that you're bringing value and awareness. And a lot of times I get mad that political campaigns are short-sighted. They only know top 40 music. They're run by, somebody that's your mom and dad's age. And, so that's how you get like Bill Clinton, did some new and interesting revolutionary shit by having "Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow" as his like big theme song, and I was like, I'm so fucking tired of baby boom. Like, how is it possible that like our campaign is, and every political campaign in like the '90s was like, what we need to do? We need to bring back that "Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow." And younger audience remembers this from nothing against you two, but like Barack Obama used like this giant intro U2 song, and every fucking politician on the left is like, I want a bright blue website, Gotham font, and get me that U2 song. And you're like, can we come up with some more originality and creativity?
There's other
So
songs out there,
yeah,
guys.
so Bernie Sanders, like we built the soundtrack around of like every song that I loved that had a revolution theme in it, and it was me and this guy Mark Levitt, who was running his Advance, team, and we're like, we're gonna purposely be the anti U2. Sorry, that's LA for you.
Los Angeles, baby.
Los Angeles, somebody's ripping up a motorcycle. So we literally were like, we're going to be the anti non U2. There will never be a U2 or a mom and dad song. And so we use like Revolution Get Down by the Bell Rays, which is like one of the most radical songs. And it also was like safe enough to be used at one point by like NASCAR and corporate world. And I was like, how do I submersively or like get this into political campaigns and organizing? So I've been sort of just pushing the envelope on this stuff for years. And finally, I just put my money where my mouth was and partnered up with Fat Mike from NoFX. He had this idea around punk voter. And I was like, well, if you're serious, man, like let's organize a pack. Let's, bring in real people. Let's raise some money. And it was like kerosene in a fire. All of
I
a
feel so
sudden,
many of those guys just don't know how to do it too, right? Like they have their political views or they have like notions they have, and like it's someone like you who has kind of like tentacles in both worlds who can really help to make that a reality and effectively make that a reality. That's not a small task.
right. I mean, it used to be that, musicians would just sing about this stuff or counterculture would sing about this stuff. But, from Punk Voter on, we operated under the banner that things have gotten so bad that the most anti-establishment thing you can do is actually get involved and vote. And people are like, well, it's not punk rock. And you're like, it literally may be the most counterculture thing you can do is actually organize. And I feel like years and years later, the time period that we're in right now was the same thing. It was like you didn't see a lot of people being like, vote Mickey Mouse, vote Ralph Nader. They're like, holy shit, the world is falling apart in America.
It
How do we,
matters.
how do we actually like do something radical? And that radicalness is like register a pack, register an organization, put money and food and send pizzas to voting lines to keep people in line for as long as possible. Make sure everybody knew the rules around absentee and early voting. Like this is all geeky shit that 10 years ago, I think every punk rocker, counterculture, anti-establishment person would be like, you want me to what? Around early voting? And now it's like, yeah, I mean, if that's what we have to do to get Donald Trump out of office, count me in.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the sexiest work, right, at times, but it really is effective work that obviously made a huge difference this time around. I would love to hear a little bit. All right, so I know you work with Mike. Let's hear a little bit about that, but I want to hear about some of the work around
Interesting, he's an
Bush.
interesting human being. Uh,
He had a show on Fuse for a bit, actually. I remember or I think he was on the Warped Tour show, and I was like watching him. I'm like, this guy is one of the most crazy people I've ever seen in my life.
complicated. He's probably one of the smartest individuals I've ever worked with, and also one of the most complex individuals.
That's how it goes, man.
Um, but it was just going like, um, how do we get everybody in society involved? And part of Punk Voter was actually embarrassing bigger artists to take a step forward because you remember like this is right around the time that the Dixie Chicks records were being banned and boycotted and they were being kicked off of radio stations and bands freaked out, management freaked out, like is this going to kill 50% of our audience? And we can't afford as a baby band to like take these stands. And Fat Mike and me talked about it for a while. It was like, look, if we put 200 artists together, first they're going to have to buy a bunch of these punk rock bands artists in order to burn their records, and second, uh, you know 200 artists, we're going to build basically the entire community. We had 30 some record labels that we launched with that were all the independents, and people understood the economics of it. People understood that in Europe, young kids were already boycotting US bands for not taking a stand on the war in Iraq. They understood that there was actually a political price they were paying for being American citizens and not giving a shit.
Mm.
And so, it was um, a
The
unity
precursor.
message. Yeah, it was like a unity message at the same time of like, well, wait a minute, if we're doing something, we can do more than just sing about it. We could actually organize. And it was a mathematical equation where each of these bands go, wait a minute, there's only a few thousand votes in Florida. Um, how many how many bands tour through Florida every single year? How many record labels? Like, wait, No Idea Records, and like there's a whole crew of punk rock kids in like Gainesville. Like, if we just got one of these equations involved, we might have been able to swing the election in 2000. So organizing, and this is ancient history, like 2004 compared to today, but like
Totally.
you watch that happen this election cycle. You watch bands become very sophisticated. This election cycle, everything was about Michigan and Detroit, and Third Man Records stepped the fuck up. I mean, they literally were like, I get it. It's during a pandemic. Come in, snap a voter registration QR code, go directly to the Secretary of State's office. We'll give you a bunch of free posters and swag. We just want you to register to vote.
So in those days, what was your main objective? I'm curious because as you mentioned, like early voting and kind of pressing, and we're in the most unique situation right now. But like what was your main objective there and do you feel you achieved it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a messaging campaign. It was, like I said, we embarrassed bigger bands to get involved, where people are like, Fat Mike and Punk Voters getting all this press, and we're like, yeah, where the fuck are you? You're in a international touring band. You've got multi-platinum records out. If Fat Mike can do it, only having like, I think at that point one gold record, maybe. I mean, like, it's not like No Effects is a great band when very credible,
Cult
um,
following almost.
but
Yeah.
they're not, they weren't on in commercial radio stations, and so the first record that we put out, Rock Against Bush Volume One, is a bunch of Rise Against gave us an amazing song, Against Me, Alkaline Trio. These were not enormously large bands. And by the second record, we got No Doubt, Foo Fighters, Green Day. Right? It was like, where
Wow.
where where are the bigger bands that are going to cough up the goods? And Green Day stepped the fuck up. They gave us a song that hadn't been released. That was directly anti-Bush. No Doubt, Offspring, Foo Fighters all stepped up, and so it was great to sort of see a community come together. So our messaging was around, tell your older brother or sister reasons why to vote against Bush. We were coming up with messaging and reasons, because if you know anything about the U.S. electoral system, nonprofits is where all the money's spent in this like very vanilla, nonpartisan messaging of, hey kids,
Go
voting
vote.
voting's cool, because
Yeah.
they can't legally say, Bush sucks on these 5 issues. That's a partisan message. So came in with a political dollars that were not tax free, not tax deductible. That was a messaging campaign that was like, here's 15 reasons that you should tell your older brother that Bush sucks. Right? Not that
Served through
you
the vehicle of music.
Right, and then we partnered with a bunch of folks. So we did DVDs that had information, and I was doing this is when people were still buying physical copies of albums, liner notes, because when I was a kid, Bad Religion's how I learned about Noam Chomsky, right? Like, the liner notes of Bad Religion albums is like where I got my education, or a Jello Biafra spoken word cassette. So
God, liner notes. I miss them.
so we did liner notes with like 150 reasons why to vote against George Bush. Here we partnered with Robert Greenwald, Brave New Films, who is putting out these documentaries on Iraq War and voting, stealing elections, like Untruth and Uncovered. So people literally got these full documentaries for free with their CD and DVD player.
That was so progressive at the time too, I'm sure. Like there's, I mean, you think about now it
I
sounds like
mean,
ancient history, right?
Move On was doing like house parties with the same vehicle. So Greenwald, is a LA film producer. He makes a decent documentary. Move On was a vehicle, but we're like, well, wait, I don't know that the punk voter audience and the Warped Tour audience is like overlapping with the Move On, crowd. So
Definitely.
like, let's put it out on 100,000 other, and we gave them away. We also did branding, like giving away T-shirts that said "Not My President," where it was like, let's make that cool with every single band. And so Bouncing Souls were handing them out on their tour. Alkaline Trio was handing them out. Anti-Flag, Rise Against was handing. So like, you couldn't go to a punk show and not see, 5 kids at least wearing a "Not My President" shirt.
And that's effective hand-to-hand combat, right? Like you're and they are the walking billboard for that kind of message. So, I mean, that's to me sounds like a really progressive point of view at a time where people probably weren't thinking like that at all.
Yeah, I mean, look, the campaign had ups and downs, and you can analyze it. And the short-term analyzation of it is, well, wait a minute, Bush didn't lose in 2004, therefore, we all suck and we should go home. The long term is how many kids were inspired and first got involved and took activism and wore an anti-Bush T-shirt every day of the week and ended up getting involved in politics. And I didn't realize that until I joined the Obama campaign, 3 years later, and saw kids rocking, "Not My President" shirts still, or having
Aha.
Rap Against Bush CDs with them. And you're like, oh shit, like this seeped into people's brains in such a deeper way.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. So Obama, obviously, probably really hot campaign to work on. Tell us a little bit about your work on that campaign.
Yeah, so I tried basically bringing in all of this knowledge that I learned from the Rock Against Bush experience. I mean, I spent 2 years, 2003, 2004, you know, figuring out, pardon me, how do you make that work with and feel authentic with the punk community and feel authentic and credible with the political community. And so some things we did really successful, some things failed, like any good experiment. But what we did was we really understood lifestyle marketing, community building. So like, flooding the market with T-shirts, giving away CDs, and doing point of purchase displays and lifestyle marketing inside record stores, skate shops, tattoo parlors, etc.
Where the
And
people
so,
go.
right, so we brought that into I brought that into the Obama campaign as like my side hustle. So my day-to-day job was doing social media and building out his mobile communications. It was the first campaign that we did text messaging. I had all this like experimental platform underneath me. And at the end of the day, like this, I want to get music involved in campaigns. You're like, well, if we're doing social media, that means YouTube. So let me get Wayne Kramer from the MC5 to be like some of our first music on our YouTube channel. And, the Bouncing Souls, it's like all the punk rock guys that I knew and grew up with were like now uh, donating their music to Barack Obama's campaign. It wasn't like, look, that primary was, again, Barack Obama versus Hillary Clinton. It wasn't Jay-Z jumping in and giving music in those early days. It was MC5 Bouncing Souls. Like,
That's interesting.
yeah,
But still I feel like
breaking news here on the Zeena Coda show. Like,
yeah, who knew? Who knew? But because I think that Obama really kind of sexed up political awareness too a bit because he was obviously such a hot candidate and obviously nobody had seen a black candidate like that before and he was young and he was fresh and
I mean, it was a campaign that was, one, fun and awesome, and two, if you were smart and crafty, you could find money to do things with. So like, I wanted to do lifestyle marketing and bring in like Shepard Fairey's artwork to the campaign, and maybe I get yelled at, maybe I get fired because somebody doesn't like it, but like, who cares? Like, there was no legal, like, you have to, like Mitt Romney's campaign years later had to go through 22 approvals for every single tweet.
ugh,
Like, this is like the beginning of this, where people like the campaign attorneys are like, what do I have to sign? And you're like, yeah, here's like a boilerplate that we're trying to do. So like we made like the rules for artists' rights and, you know, fair use language and universal gratis contracts with, you know, as long as the artists were doing stuff on their own individual times and not using a corporation, you know, they could donate their own craft. And we just sort of figured this stuff out as we went. But there was no like, oh my God, you know, how dare you bring in Shepard Fairey? You know, he's got a lot of criminal record and he's wanted in 3 countries for graffiti charges. Like nobody gave a shit. It was like, all right. And then you find out like people like David Axelrod were like from the Carolinas and like, you know, or had family in the Carolinas and was like super big fan of Shepard Fairey. Like it
You
was
just
just
never
kind of,
know. Yeah.
yeah, it was just kind of like this cool thing where you're like, well, they may hate me or it may be fine. Like this is old, but you know, like we were experimenting at the time with ringtones because I thought like everybody and
Oh
their brother
man.
was trying to like think about ringtones, right? So like it went on the Jon Stewart, the Daily Show made fun of my ringtones, and because I was like had a ringtone that played like Barack Obama's speech on healthcare, and they goofed on it. You know, everybody in the campaign's laughing at me and being like, "Oh, that was Goodstein. He did that," you know. And then 30,000 people go and download our ringtones and sign up for our text message list. Like kids get it, you know,
Yep.
and so it was just like this weird experimental, like, you know, the campaign was cool. My boss at the time was this guy Joe Rosebars, who was one of the inventors of the Howard Dean Internet campaign 4 years earlier. And you know, he just gave me the leeway to like do shit, and then every once in a while he'd like try and rein me in a little bit, but
But that's
uh,
such a great opportunity too, because you're at a technologically revolutionary time, right? And at a time where communication was changing to be a very, very personalized to each individual through their phone, which really did change the way we as a society globally have kind of communicated. But that's as somebody who's a marketer, right?
just
That's always the sweet spot. You're like, yes, like nobody's regulating me yet. Like, let me experiment and have a good time
totally.
and
And people
see what
want to
pops off.
know, yeah, people want to know like why didn't I want to do the RELA campaign? And you're like, because the time had moved. Now everything is under scrutiny because he's the president of the United States, and
Totally.
uh, you know, it was not this wild wild west like let's make the rule book up as we go kind of vibe. It was like nobody wants to screw up anything. Like you don't want to be the person that screws up the president of the United States'
And the
campaign.
first black president too, so there's a lot of pressure
A
there, yeah.
bad tweet, right? Like you know,
Bad look,
like
bad look.
no one's excited about that. But also it was the perfect storm. It wasn't like every single candidate and campaign had that vibe. I had friends. It was like you know 5 or 6 way primary when you know like that. I also had the candidate and the candidate's wife that was cool as shit and was like, I'm gonna go be the candidate, and I don't care what weird platform you want. Like, if you want me to do this, and it's already like I'm gonna figure it out, and I'm gonna do it.
Came to work.
And you know, like Barack Obama did not understand or care about Twitter. He wasn't gonna like put it on his phone and tweet out to the world. Like, it wouldn't even made sense to be like, hey, put this thing on your phone and tell the world your innermost thoughts. Like nobody was on Twitter. That wasn't like how we were using it back then. Oh, by the way, back then Twitter was still used for good. Like
I
imagine that.
know. Look at that. What a glorious time that was before
Yeah.
but hopefully we're returning to that with all of the different things. And I'll have a question for you about that later. But what do you think, as I've always been really interested about working digital for a campaign, which is actually how we kind of collided because I was just really curious on that work. And what do you think is one of the things that people would least expect to know about working on a campaign through digital?
I think you have to set up your goals ahead of time. And I think that people that work in like agency digital or like bad PR digital, where they just, you know, come up with like every day is another, like they don't really think about what the goal is or the tone or the voice, where political has a very, very short timeline. Like you either are winning the primary, you're either getting the amount of money raised by the end of the quarter, you're getting people registered by registration deadline. Like it is very concrete and very precise on the goals. And so how do you use the digital media to meet those goals and save the campaign, hopefully time and money? And, I still think, and I teach young people digital for organizing that have come out of agency world. And they're like, okay, we just put the press release on Facebook and we put the press release on Twitter and we take a picture of the press release and we put that on Instagram. You're like, that is
That's not the method.
not helping the goal in any way. You're not, there's no engagement, there's no um
You gotta
personality.
make it for the platform. That's what I am constantly trying to sell. It's like you if you are an outside contributor to a platform, you have to work within what performs on the platform. You can't
Yeah,
just think
and,
you're gonna shoehorn it in, you know?
and and pre it being all one platform of Facebook dominating the world, I had this cool job in Obama world of like 30 different platforms that all had their own vibe. So like there was, Black Planet, Asian Avenue, there were like 15 Latinx platforms,
Mhm.
some in Spanish, some not in Spanish, some in part Spanish. There was a Native American platform. And then my favorite platform of that entire era was Disaboom,
What is that?
the Disabled American Communities platform. And you're
What?
like, well, why would Barack Obama go on Disaboom? And you're like, why not, man? Like, you already know you're starting the conversation at such an interesting level. Like, you are like
Yeah.
anybody that's on there already knows about ADA. So sending them a press release of Barack Obama's stance on ADA, like that was bullshit. Like, but it was like,
Be
well, what,
compliant.
yeah, like what, but what's Barack Obama going to have as an interesting discussion in Disaboom with the disabled American community? And it was like, let's discuss the problems with ADA versus like, this or just, basic bread and butter. Like, what are you doing for me to get ahead? Or how am I getting higher education? Or, like you can have just an interesting conversation. And like we went into LinkedIn first with LinkedIn was all like conservative and CEOs of businesses back in the
Mm.
day. And matter of fact, I still think that campaigns are making a giant mistake of not organizing in LinkedIn.
Oh, I
Like
agree.
more and
I
more
agree.
people everywhere are reading shit in LinkedIn because they're just like so tired of the dribble and shit in Facebook.
And you know you're getting some kind of quality in the content that's being posted there, whether or not it's
From a
job
credible
prospects.
person in your wheelhouse. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like
no.
everything that you learn in campaign 101 is sitting in that like unique niche of a platform and people like, again, this is sort of, you're helping me. Maybe I should be, you should be billing me for this cathartic session of
Yeah, 2024, we'll see.
getting it off my chest. But like, like to me, like there's still interesting creative platforms out there. There may not be 30 of them like there was like before Facebook gobbled up everybody, but um,
Yeah, I mean, the evolution of digital platforms has happened. It's such an accelerated rate, right? Think about the last 20 years in that time frame you're even talking about, where you went from like literally hand to hand combat, like traditional marketing avenues that honestly felt very genuine, right? And it was very personalized. To now, it's like let's blast it out and see what we get. And everywhere in between has been a trial and error, and MySpace era, and all these different other communities, Friendster, that kind of bubbled up in that in between time, have all kind of led us to where we are right now, for sure. So after Brock, what did you end up doing?
I started an agency to go and dig deeper. So like I did the inauguration in 2009, and then the day after the inauguration, I took a plane ride out to Fontana, California to try and organize warehouse workers using mobile communication. Like the geek side of me was like, how do we use digital to do better forms of organizing? So I was like doing a lot of labor union organizing, trying to figure out how to use mobile apps for organizing, how to use text messaging for organizing. And then I built one of the first calling Congress platforms because there just wasn't a way to skirt the US congressional phone system. Every political
God.
campaign was like, dial the switchboard at 224-3121 and tell your member of Congress. And you're like, wait a minute, like we can build smarter shit than this with Twilio in 2 minutes and figure this out. And so you all of a sudden learn, like, wait a minute, how a bill becomes a law is super complicated, and you may only want to be calling 4 members of Congress that matter. Sometimes you want to be calling the House, sometimes you want to be calling the Senate, sometimes you want to be calling people in your district. So, I geeked out and built an amazing agency, did that for 10 years, sold my agency to my business partners, and started doing international organizing for the left, because I was watching, like, shitheads like Paul Manafort and, sooner or later, Jared Kushner,
Mm.
going in and fucking with countries that they had no business to be fucking with. And so the left is usually way underfunded in the US. It's even worse in oligarch countries and dictatorships.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
predictable for sure.
yeah, I
Who
mean,
wants to counter?
nothing shocking. Like, I tried doing the No Against Erdogan campaign, and I could not get a single person to give money against Erdogan, because it was like, wait a minute, you want us to give money against a man who could kill us? And you're like, yeah, makes sense.
Protect your ass, yeah.
So, like, I've helped out, like, LGBTQ organizations, like Kiev Pride, a small group of young LGBTQ kids that are, like, facing real challenges and obstacles, where they still round up the gays in places like Ukraine.
Crazy.
And so a lot of it's been in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, where they're already technically democracies and have an election. They may just not have a fair election.
Yeah.
So I had the honor to help Trudeau on his first election in Canada. Brazil, I've worked in Iraq. So it's been some fun, crazy stuff. And then all of a sudden you have to, like, look at the dictatorship back at home. So I turned back, and that's how me and you met, was thinking about, like, how do we defeat this jackass in the White House?
Yeah. I'm glad to say that we're out on the other side of it. Thank God. But
Well, we
yeah,
are recording this a few days before inauguration, so
yeah. Breathe deep, breathe deep. Yeah. We'll have to see. We'll see how it goes in the next week. Literally in the last week, things have just been super, super crazy. And Trump is just, it's like unbelievable to me. It's hard to even recount how much crazy shit this man has thrown out into the universe. Like, and I think a lot about, and you obviously have a really great insider view here. Like, how do we get here, right? And how did we get to this level of extremism? And it feels like it's been bubbling up for years and years and years. To the
yeah.
point
But
of
this
like,
look, there is always this weird pendulum swing of right wing extremists being tolerated. And I know a lot of people love to throw in, like, the Nazi Germany analogies, so I'll spare that your audience that, but I would look at Middle East analogies and say, like, there's always these rise of right-wing dictators or proxy wars that are used to keep people fighting against each other while somebody is getting rich all the time. And if you look at countries like Iraq and Iran, um, Shia didn't hate Sunni, Muslims didn't hate Jews and Christians. Like, that has been, you know, ratcheted up to help somebody's political agenda. And that's happened in our lifetime. That's not like over 150 years or over 5,000 years. Like this has changed drastically in the 70s and 80s and 90s, where these were some of the countries that were the most sophisticated in educating women, that are now, like, banning women from being able to do anything and have to wear a hood over their head and a hijab, and like that all has happened, like, very quickly, to change with people's political agendas. And I think that we're watching the radical right in the U.S. be given permission
mm,
up until January 6th, when people go, oh shit, let's put that genie back in the bottle. um, Right.
Yeah.
And thank God. I mean, thank God that people are now like being afraid and embarrassed to admit that they were Donald Trump. Like every jackass friend of mine that I went to high school with that
Ugh.
loved themselves some Donald Trump is shockingly quiet now on social media.
Oh, the embarrassment, right? I mean, you're right. Like people associate obviously to kind of bolster the power of their argument in a line, whatever way. I mean, you think about the religious association, you think about, the white power
Yeah,
association,
but I mean, like Nazi jackasses in the '80s and early '90s would show up at punk rock shows, and
and it'd be a beat down. Yeah, I know.
right, and it made sense. It was anti-establishment. It was music that had easy to jingle nationalistic, right? But like you know, when people like the Dropkick Murphys, smash a Nazi on stage and say it's not acceptable, people stop showing up. Where like Riverside, California, has constantly had problems of like Nazism seems to be acceptable over there.
Yeah.
And like DC, where I grew up, like fighting and Ian Mackay from Fugazi, he stopped the shows. He's like notorious for being known as stopping shows, but at the same time, like I didn't see Nazis showing up in DC. It just was not acceptable to be anywhere around Aryan Nation, white right wing assholes. Working class Cleveland, Ohio, had a little bit more of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's always those that are not of those extreme, parts of point of view, but do have some allegiance with people like Trump, et cetera. Like, I think that, the extremists go somewhere, right? When it becomes unpopular for their opinion to be vocal, they go somewhere. And I actually am kind of, I'm wondering where they go after this, right? I mean, parlor, whatever the case, but like, how will this now manifest itself in another way? And I think that that's a little bit of the danger and just kind of the fear that a lot of people have moving forward. But I think like after a year like this, everybody is just dying for some optimism or
Well,
just for some hope at this
I
point.
hope that the left, which can also be insufferable at times,
Oh, so insufferable at times too.
right? But like, I hope that the left gets smarter about this and doesn't let it sort of just dissipate for a few months and then start being popular again. Like these things, like I was saying, in like Iraq, just didn't happen overnight. Like there was a movement that gradually rose to sort of tolerating people taking rights away from women, right? Like we went from a society that had like some of the highest education level in women to like not allowing women to participate. Like that doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah.
So like in the US, I would hope that we look at some of these other analogies in other places and say, wait a minute, just because it's unpopular right now, let's actually go after all of their funding. Every one of these groups that like funded going into these assholes raining into the Capitol should lose their 501c3 license. Every state legislative right wing asshole that wanted to be there because they thought that this is where the cool kids were going, they should pay a political price and lose their office and be kicked out of office for showing like if we just sort of let this go away, then it will start. There will be no political consequence for it.
Yeah. You've tested the boundaries. And that's why I think a lot of people are, obviously pushing so hard for impeachment because it's setting a precedence. And I think that, I understand that point of view because you want to be careful about what you allow because it can only be expanded. I have a quick question for you about, obviously we went with Biden. He ended up our winner, but you worked on the Bernie campaign. I don't know if it was this time around. I think it was last time
No,
around,
it
right?
was the
Yeah.
first one. It's
Yeah.
2015. Yeah.
Last time around. And Bernie's always felt like the people's champion. For me personally, I fuck with some of the things that Bernie was, some of his perspectives and some of his, his policies and ideas and his points of view. Honestly, very I can understand where they came from. Why do you think that this time around it didn't necessarily kind of pan out for him?
Pardon me. For a couple of reasons. One, I think I joined the Bernie campaign for the same reason I joined the Barack Obama campaign. I didn't think that necessarily either candidate was going to win when I joined, but I wanted a strong message and a credible candidate from as closest to my point of view. The difference between Obama and Bernie was Obama was a very pragmatic campaigner, and Bernie was not. In 2015 and 2016, Bernie was more of a dreamer against Hillary Clinton, and there was the coalition of the willing of every facet of labor union groups and anti-NAFTA groups and anti-Walmart groups that um, African American groups, right? Like there was a number of people that didn't like Hillary Clinton for a number of issues. So whether it was
Mm.
that she sat on the board of Walmart or she called African American super predators, right? Like there's 100 reasons why you might not have liked Hillary Clinton. And so that was a giant coalition that may or may not have had anything to do with Bernie. There was also maybe you just didn't like that she wasn't consistent with her policies, and Bernie was. So to me, it wasn't always about Bernie in 2015, 2016. I still think that had Elizabeth Warren run in 2015, she would have probably kicked Hillary's ass. Like there was clearly a momentum that was moving the right way. So in
Yeah.
2016, Bernie started in a very different place. He started with this giant list. And I think he looked at it and goes, well, in a 30-way primary, I've got this giant list of 7, 8, 10 million people. I could just burn it down. And maybe with 1 million people, I can win this primary. So they didn't really grow the list anymore. Look, it almost worked out for him.
Yeah,
But I
but
think
I mean, he got close
but I
again.
think I think his problem was is that he never grew. You
Mhm.
didn't see him grow the coalition. There was a lot of talk about the Latinx community. It didn't fully pan out for him,
Which
right?
is
Like,
interesting because on a personal level, I feel like a lot of my Latina friends and, my friends who are Latin really, really loved him, loved Bernie. And it is interesting to see like how it kind of panned out for him over the course of those years where obviously he was still kind of vying for the presidency. And
yeah, but
yeah, just didn't
I
feel
think
like it did
it
grow.
was more of an age issue than an ethnicity issue. So
Hmm.
young African Americans love Bernie. Older African Americans were like, okay, I don't see how his policies pan out. Who's going to pay for this? The Daily Show interviewed a bunch of Latinx community that went to a Bernie event. And they asked him immediately afterwards, and it was like half the crowd was like, "Yeah, it all sounds great, but how's he going to pay for this shit?"
Yeah,
So it
he don't
just
got a plan for that.
right. It was just like people understood, that it was a lot more imaginative of a true progressive future than a pragmatic way of how to get there. The flip side of that is probably right, like literally Elizabeth Warren saying, I have a plan for this, I have a plan for this, I have a plan for this. But in fairness to Elizabeth Warren's team, she kind of did. So I just think that my quick gut answer for your short podcast segment on this is that you always got to be thinking about organizing and growing. And so to me, the punk community was like one piece of growth. Another piece of growth is like the pro-choice community, LGBT community. Like, how can we build a coalition of larger allies and constantly keep growing? And I just don't see how Bernie in 2016's campaign was like really reaching out and growing and building a bigger movement.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So walking into obviously trying to get Trump out of office is how we met. And you were working on Artists United for Change. And I happened to kind of, scoop in on some of that work with you. It migrated and kind of, shaped itself into be something else, a little bit more physical art, like physical artists.
Can you imagine had we launched something that was
With Cardi B.
I mean, we wanted to do like, sorry for like inciting on your podcast. Like, we wanted to originally launch an Artists United movement that was going to bring artists to battleground states, not in like these like last week and Jay-Z flying in when registration was over, but like, could we actually do
Get
this
him
like
out there. Yeah.
right artists and fun events like in Michigan instead of all these artists flying to Iowa and New Hampshire for the primaries. The
I mean, it
problem
was really important for me to bring artists of color because I was heading up, urban digital marketing at that time. And I'm like, all of these artists talk about wanting to make a change and want to affect youth in the community. And it was really, I'll tell you, that was my first time
It's
kind of
hard.
digging in. Oh, not only was it hard, but I mean, you had kind of forewarned me in a very like subtle way how hard it was going to be, but just doing the legwork and all the people I reached out to, and so many people who just were not comfortable at all with
There,
aligning with politics.
every time I flew out to California, there was like the music industry, management world was always like so politically sure of themselves. They're like, the election's over. The Democrats have won. The election's screwed. The Democrats are going to lose. And you're like, how is it that you're like this bad at figuring out like, and this is months and months and months
This
before
is
the
like
primary.
years.
Yeah.
You
and,
out. Like
and
we were
so
on it.
we had two problems on that. One, getting artists to sign on and understand like early voter registration and excitement and youth excitement outside of whoever was going to win the primary was a problem. And then the second problem was the pandemic. So where now nobody's flying anywhere. So had we
Yeah.
launched, right, we've been okay, we're gonna start launching and sending artists in like April and May.
And then
It
they're nowhere. Yeah.
would have been horrible. So, we like, lesson learned. I swore I wasn't gonna launch it until, we had like a really good, diverse lineup of artists on board and like a $500,000 in the bank. And, pandemic happens, and instead, me, you, everybody that we knew was like, how do we help
Hmm.
solve for coronavirus, get people masks, get people food. So I did that for a few months, and then like partnered up with Robin Bell, a friend of mine in DC who's a visual artist, and we came up with this "Remember What They Did" concept. And we'd already done all of the legwork, and I'd registered a pack, and just hadn't done anything with it. So we figured, well, why not? Let's just do this and invite visual artist friends. um, and then I got 5 visual artist friends on board, and it's like, oh shit, I guess I'm doing this now. Like, I remember calling you up, and you're like, well, how do I know if this is any good?
I was like, show it to me. I want to see.
Yeah,
As a true businesswoman, I'm always semi skeptical of everything. So,
what do you
just gotta
got?
see.
Let's
Gotta see.
Yeah,
Gotta see.
let me
Yeah.
see the goods. So we did some of the most, I think, some of the most radical art that was all fact based and didn't pull punches. And again, because of the stupid U.S. laws around um, nonprofit organizing and nonpartisan get out the vote work, there was a ton of voter registration out there that had no real anti-Trump messaging. So
Yeah.
our goal wasn't really registration. Our goal was, how do you take the energy in the streets around Black Lives Matter, around inequalities, around who was getting fucked on coronavirus and PPE, and build that into the Biden campaign world, whether Biden was going to touch any of these issues or not, whether rock the vote or some of these nonprofits and nonpartisan efforts could touch these issues. We didn't give a shit. Like my money, like we raised the right type of money and registered the right type of way. It's like we
It was
we
an
can we can
emotional prompt.
yeah,
Yeah.
we can talk about what jackasses all of these right wings are, and we created the hashtag vote them out. We didn't create it. We use the hashtag vote them out. I don't want somebody to be like, you didn't create that.
It was me.
We're like, look, let's just build the bandwagon for up and down the entire ballot and vote all of these fuckers out. Like, they are all complicit in allowing this crazy right wing nationalist. I mean, we didn't see that like Gretchen Whitmer was going to be attacked in the Michigan
Yeah, that was
Capitol and
insane.
plots. We didn't see that the U.S. Senate. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh my god, we were geniuses on, but like we thought like, let's keep talking about these issues around, this is a side that's locking up kids in cages. And all of a sudden when it comes out in the last debate, people are like, who's talking about it? We're like, we have 3 pieces of art, like,
And
here it is.
billboards
Right?
nonetheless in
Yeah.
those cities. So,
Yeah,
and
so it was
cities
it
where
was
they
just
needed to
sort of
be.
like, yeah, it was an awesome campaign to just go like, how do we do and fairly pay artists to do what they do best with factual quotes.
Yeah, no, I loved it, and I thought it was a great way to pivot in a crazy situation, and obviously contributed to, just highlighting some of the really insane, offensive, detrimental things that, between Trump and his party and everybody in between had really, the crimes against society really that they
I
had
mean,
committed.
we had everything from coronavirus, where Trump was saying like, "Why is this happening to me?" Like coronavirus, is woe is poor Donald Trump. To you know, police brutality, to racism, to
When the looting starts, the shooting starts.
yeah. I mean, it was just
Yeah.
like all of these issues. And let's just put it was similar to Punk Voter and Rock Against Bush. Let's put facts out there so you can argue with your mom or your dad, or you're a 15-year-old but you're woke and you want to get your 18-year-old knucklehead brother to get off his ass and go vote. Like, let's talk about the real issues. Oh, you're so woke and you're so into anti-police brutality and you're rocking a BLM shirt. Did you register? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing to get these assholes out of office? And
Take the action. Yeah.
that was a spirit, and we partnered with some amazing artists. I got to meet this great artist in Detroit named Shades, and we went down ballot. We went again and helped U.S. Senator Gary Peters squeak by and win that race against like this crazy right wing jackass. So like it was fun. We I worked with the Claudia Martinez and did immigration and Latinx issues in Milwaukee, where people forget like, yeah, there's a lot of Latinos that live in Milwaukee.
Who knew? I didn't know that. But
Turns out,
Scott, that's the knowledge that you bring. Well,
just
I
got
got one.
drop that down.
Mark it down. I have one last question for you. Do you feel that Donald Trump has indeed drained the swamp?
I mean, is that a euphemism for something?
No, I mean, you know what I actually think about a lot is these tech platforms because I'm working, obviously these social media platforms, working day in and day out with them. There's been a bunch of documentaries over the last few years, especially like in this Trump administration, where he's brutally abused Twitter and kind of stretched the limits of where it should go, right? And then Facebook, there's been issues, and I've had a very close eye and ear on very insider parts of that, and it's just to me, where was the end going to be for these platforms, right? When were they actually going to take a stand against what was right and what was wrong? And the one sad, unfortunate part is that it took blood loss, it took lives, it took a lot of destruction. But it's interesting to see that we have ended his presidency, let's hope, in a place where some of these platforms, or most of these platforms, have really been challenged and obliged to put it on their head, right? Like they are now having to really having to think about their policies and take a stand against him and against what they will and will not stand for in the future. And also just, even the Republican Party, like thinking about like a little bit of the division there and like, some of these people just completely disappearing, which is to my delight half the time. But yeah, do you
Yeah,
think
I
he's
mean, look,
actually inadvertently done it? Let's put it that
yeah,
way.
I wouldn't give him that credit, nor would I give the social media companies credit for acting in good faith.
It's pretty fucking
Uh,
late. Let's say that. It's pretty
so,
fucking late. They
well,
incited a lot.
like, this is going to shock you. The one thing that I agree with Donald Trump on over the last 4 years is that Section 230 of the Communications and Decency Act needs to disappear. And this section is what basically gives shield law protections to social media platforms. It was created back in the day when like Prodigy was like
Oh
worried
my
that they were going
God.
to get sued. Right? They're like, look, we can't tell if there's a pedophile on AOL or Prodigy. Like we are
Mhm.
literally just the gateway. We don't listen in. Like like we're the series of tubes that everybody's talking about, right? Like so fast forward, right? Social media companies have used that and expanded that section. So like in the last international trade agreement that we did, Nancy Pelosi got it. It was like, oh, we gave that to them. Like literally, it was slid into the new NAFTA agreement. So like these guys can't say like that they don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And Trump was like, wait a minute, you guys are gonna take me away from Twitter. I want to get rid of. I'm gonna pull the nuclear button on Section 230. Good, because Twitter now and Facebook know that the wind is blowing against them. I don't think this had shit to do with Donald Trump. I think they looked at it and go, wait a minute, it's going to be a Democratic U.S. Senate that we're going to have to go
Better act
before.
fast.
It's going to be a Democratic Congress that we're going to go for. The attorney generals are all coming after us. Fuck.
Yeah, Mark
And
Zuckerberg is
and so, like, what can we do so that we seem like the best PR? And you'll notice that every time that Twitter or Facebook needs decent PR, they make a bullshit announcement. Like Twitter's like, we're going to get rid of all political ads on Twitter. They made less than $2 million total on political ad. It was never a platform that was being used for political advertisement, but yet they did it in a way that was like, we're never going to talk about the amount of bots and all the other shit that we have on our platform, right? Like they knew that their real problems were bullying bots and all this other, spam and hate speech that they're allowing on their platform.
it's a tough job. I mean, I do sympathize in some ways, but it's been around so long at this point that,
Yeah,
like,
I have zero sympathy for them because it's so arbitrary. And you mean to tell me that you accept and have raised billions of dollars, but yet can't figure out how to hire 4 or 5 people to actually deal with this stuff? Like,
yeah.
like, how do you not figure out a way to proxy spam against the same 4 countries that everybody knows you could build a bot through?
And I
Um,
think that, people have adopted it and utilized it for completely different reasons than they probably initially had thought. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who've worked at these platforms for years or like were there at the beginning. And yeah, like they all start off with the best of intentions. But I think it's another thing that, like, as technology in these communication vehicles continue to grow, there's always a dirty underbelly to all of it. And we're going to have to keep a close eye and be vigilant about it.
Well, and let's end this with: do I think he drained the swamp? Like he may still pardon him or try to pardon himself.
Yeah, we're not
You
totally
know,
out of it yet.
like
We're not totally there.
he pardoned like criminals, and really really horrible human beings that did atrocities. He pardoned uh, murderers,
He's
like
shameless.
people that literally murdered innocent lives overseas. He just was like, yeah, I'm going to pardon you. And so that is not what we are not run by kings and queens. Like this is not the America that any of us were raised to understand. And so, you know, I hope that there's a nice warm spot for him in The Hague, and that he sits there for a very long time when this is all over.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping to a better 2021 for sure. It's anyone's game over the next week or so, but we shall see. Scott, I want to thank you so much for joining. You're just, you have a lot of great history and insight, and you're a smart guy with a good
Oh,
taste in music. So always great to have,
I
people who
think
I align
punk
with on.
rock is gonna be amazing again. If punk rock bands can't figure out ways to write interesting songs post January 6th, like so I just feel like the left is gonna hopefully be more empowered to start singing out and preaching a little more.
For sure. Where can people find you?
At Goodstein or catalystcampaigns.com.
Awesome. Reach out, follow him. Thanks so much, Scott.
Alrighty, take care.